Emanating from the wrestling capital of the world, Calgary, Dramatic Pause, Alberta, Canada, and broadcasted around the world at www.stormwrestling.com. This is Storm Warning, your weekly audio check-in from ECW superstar Lance Storm.
Lance, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing good.
How's the weather in Calgary?
We got our first snowfall, so it's welcome back to winter.
Yeah, no more Georgia for you, Lance.
Yeah, well, we're back in Tennessee in 2 weeks, so.
Sun's up. Hey, nice article this week, or this month rather, in WOW magazine about you. Yeah, had a peek at it yet?
I haven't had a chance, actually. Dave Scheer called me like a month or so ago wanting information on it, and so I've been looking forward to seeing it, but I haven't had a chance yet.
It's a really nice one. You should pick it up. The newsstands available everywhere. Lots to cover this week. Start with something that really surprised everybody in the wrestling world, caught everyone by surprise. I never thought I'd say this, Lance, but Dusty Rhodes was at an ECW show on the weekend. What's up with that?
I don't know. I guess he got his release from WCW, and I'm assuming Paul's worked with him a fair bit in the past, and thought it would be an interesting addition to our locker room, and I think he was.
Mm-hmm.
The segment he did, I believe, will air on TNN on Friday.
How did the segment go?
It was phenomenal. All the boys were backstage with the monitor, and the crowd was on their feet. And he the man's got charisma. He's got charisma coming out, coming out his ears. And the crowd come up for him, and sitting back on the monitor, I had goosebumps. It was just, he's amazing.
Was it a monitor sellout?
Pretty much, yeah. There was actually a couple monitors, so we wasn't too packed.
Is this just going to be a one-shot deal for Dusty, or you guys actually thinking about signing him to a contract?
I don't know if they're actually going to go that far or not. I haven't talked to Paul on it. I believe it's more than a one-shot deal. I wouldn't be surprised to see him do a few TVs and so forth. I don't know if he'll just, do a nightly thing when he feels like he wants to work or what. I don't know. But it'll certainly be an interesting addition.
Are you surprised to hear an ECW crowd pop so loud for, the American Dream, who hasn't really done much since, 1979, 81?
I think the ECW crowds were very, very respectful of guys that, were somebody in the business. Not that he's,
right.
He's not anymore, but I mean, if you've ever been anybody in the business and been respected for being over or a good worker or whatever, the first time you come to ECW, they really sort of pop for you and respect you.
Right.
And so I think that was a lot of it. It was, hardcore ECW fans just happy to see, somebody that they've seen before, but now on their own turf.
Sure. What can Dusty offer you guys?
I think he can offer us, he can teach a lot of young guys that, 100 moonsaults isn't necessarily the best match.
Right.
Because this is a guy who, I hope I don't insult him by this, I wouldn't think so, didn't necessarily do a whole lot of actual wrestling or moves, but was incredibly over and very popular and had good matches by, basically punch, kick, and charisma.
And bionic elbow.
And the bionic elbow, which he used in Atlanta.
I was going to say, did he drop it on Carino? Did Carino get it?
You have to watch on Friday to find out.
Oh, look at you.
Well, you don't want to spoil it. It was an emotional night.
Let's talk about some of the other guys returning to ECW this past weekend. Too Cold Scorpio.
Yeah, he was in and worked Mike Awesome. I didn't see the match, but I heard it was really good. I don't know if he's going to be in permanently or not. I'd heard a long time ago, the last time he was brought in, that it was probably just going to be a night here, a night there, sort of as a, you need an extra pop, bring an extra surprise in or whatever, use him, because he's always good for an exciting match.
Oh, absolutely. I think he was the only guy that, him and Julio Fantastico, the only two that actually looked decent at that Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view as well.
Actually, I didn't really care for that match.
Well, it was a spot fest. I mean, the transitions were pretty weak, but nonetheless, at least he was in shape.
Yeah, definitely in shape and did some nice stuff, but the finish missed by a yard and a half.
How about Tracy Smothers? Surprised to see him back?
Not really, because he's actually worked 3 or 4 other loops for us anytime we're in the area. Fortunately for me, this was the first one I actually managed to make. I think the last 3 loops he worked for us I missed.
Mm-hmm.
And, Tracy and I are pretty good friends way back from Smokey, so it was good to see him again.
Mm-hmm.
He wrestled Rob Van Dam at the TV taping and had an incredible match.
Rob Van Dam's back full-time now?
From what I understand, he worked the whole weekend, and I believe he's on the road full-time again.
This was a really weird week in professional wrestling, starting with the Monday night show with Hoovy and Jushin. It was a week of either overshoots or missed catches, depending on who you talk to. Tell us what happened with Super Callow and Little Guido on the weekend.
Yeah, that was actually interesting because I'd actually read on the net already sort of blame being put towards Guido, which isn't fair. Because I was there when they come back to the curtain, and Big Sally, I guess, had actually said to Callow before they went out, beforehand in the match, wait till I get around the corner and pair up with Guido so we can catch you, because Guido's not a very big guy,
Right.
and Callow's actually pretty big, especially for a luchador. And he was specifically told, wait till I get there so we can both catch you, because if it's just Guido, you're not going to get the strongest catch that you want. And Paul watched the match, I didn't, and Paul come back and said that Guido took the bump out, and before he even got up off the floor from selling, Callow was in the air. And he said Guido didn't even see him until he was already cleared him. And Callow just jumped the gun, either being too excited or too anxious.
Right.
And, Sally was still coming around the corner from the post, and Guido hadn't even got up off the floor yet, and he's flying through the air. Probably overexcited, figuring, here's his first shot in ECW, wants to be spectacular, and got overly excited and jumped the gun. And, off he goes to the hospital.
How'd he land? I heard his hip's pretty messed up.
Yeah, I think he did a helo, a front flip of some kind, so he would have come down, pretty hard on his hip. They were concerned it was his back, but it was definitely his hip. He was there the next night, but was not walking very well at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think him and New Jack could have had a limp fest or something.
Limping ain't easy.
Yeah, no kidding.
Did you get a chance to see Hoovy and Jushin from last Monday?
I didn't. I wish I did, though, because I heard about it, and I would have liked to have the chance to, voice my opinion on, whether it was a intentional bad catch, just a lazy catch, or it was an overshoot. It's always hard to tell.
It looked like Liger reached for him, but that Hoovy was almost over him or sort of beside him too far.
Yeah, which, you never know whether, Hoovy just overshot or whether, Liger just was, looking for a Coke and not really in the right position.
Mm.
I remember when I went to Lebanon way back, like in my second or third year in the business, I was sharing a room with Mondo Guerrero, and he was telling me stories about in Mexico with, guys being so high-flying and it being very competitive. He said a lot of times the older guys, when they see the new guy coming up that's really exciting and doing big dives, tend to, look the other way and accidentally miss a catch here and there to slow them down.
Oh, really?
And he said that him and Chavo used to with Eddie, because Eddie, well, he still does, but even back then was, just a flying machine.
Mm-hmm.
Said that him and Chavo occasionally would go into the locker room before the match and pull a guy aside and say, if you don't catch Eddie, you're going to have to deal with us.
Really?
And basically say, don't give me a, I slipped on a Coke, or, a fan pushed me or anything. He says, no excuses, you catch him or you'll deal with us.
Wow.
And, so it's such a trust in this business, and, if you're not careful, and unfortunately a lot of the Mexican guys who rely so heavily on the moves and the dives, they try to get it in regardless. And if you're working with a guy who's perhaps not a good catcher or much smaller than yourself, it's so hard.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy in Japan I worked with, Battle Ranger, who, had to do his dive every night. And he was working a karate guy one time who was really, really small, had never caught a dive in his life of any kind. And Battle Ranger decides he's got to do the big dive tonight and does a top rope moonsault out to the floor. And he got, basically a glance and a hand waved in his direction on the catch, and he plowed into the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the catcher's fault. The guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
And I think guys need to, evaluate who's out there and whether it's, worth risking your life to the catch. Certainly Liger should be a good catch with all that he's done, but...
Well, I mean, he's a total professional, too. And that's the thing that shocks me about this situation. If, in fact, it was a missed catch or, Liger just got lazy and said, screw it, Hoovy, take it yourself. I mean, Liger's been in the business for, 20 years? Total professional.
Yeah, and you don't know the whole scenario either. Perhaps in the locker room, for all we know, Liger was hurt and said, I'd really rather you didn't do the big dive tonight. My shoulder's hurt and it bothers me if I catch you.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy did it anyway. You don't know, so it's so hard to judge something like that unless you're in the locker room with them. Sure. Even the one time I worked Skydiving J in Japan, a big junior one night thing, all junior matches, titled Skydiving J, so everybody wants to do their big dives. And I had a pretty big dive in Japan. And we were working with two New Japan guys, Samurai and Hanaga. And Hanaga was doing the job for me, and I don't think he was probably all that happy about it, having to do a job for a gaijin from a smaller company.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came time to, work out some dives and stuff, he just didn't seem all that interested. And so I just decided at that point, well, I'm not doing the dive.
So you didn't do it?
No, I didn't. The office was a little bit curious afterwards. Why? No big dive. And I'm like, this guy didn't seem too interested in catching it, and I didn't really, and it was, the helo flip over the top rope without touching anything. I just didn't feel like, shattering my pelvis on the floor if he decides to, bend down and tie his boots.
Speaking of Japan, the latest import, as you were, for ECW from Japan, Akuto Hidaka, had an outstanding match with Super Crazy on TNN this past week. How's he working out for you guys?
I've only seen him work twice now, and his matches seem to start off a little bit slow, but then once he gets flying and hitting the high spots, he seems really good.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he does appear to be about $1.25
I think he weighs, like, legitimately as a shooter, I think he's about a buck 40, and he
Yeah.
really looks a buck 40.
Yeah, he looks really, really small, and as my wife pointed out, he looks like he has a pom-pom on his head for hair.
He's like Sideshow Bob.
Exactly. But yeah, he seems to have some decent wrestling skills and some gifts, and we'll probably get some good matches out of him with Crazy or Tajiri or even Jerry Lynn. I don't imagine there's going to be huge long-term plans for him, even just based on his size.
Sure. ECW fans really like the FMW wrestlers coming over. How are they to someone from, Hidaka's from Battle Arts, which is a different style, I suppose, more heavy on the psychology and the submissions. How are the ECW fans reacting to him?
They, oddly enough, because when I heard he was from Battle Arts, I said, well, isn't that like a shoot promotion, or at least a shoot style promotion?
Yeah.
And they said, well, yeah, it is, but they've been working with Michinoku. And I'm like, boy, nothing like oil and water trying to
No
mix.
kidding, eh?
Let's put the luchadors in with the shoot fighters. But so he's obviously learned both, because he obviously did a lot of high flying stuff with Crazy, and I would imagine based on his shoot background, him and Guido would probably have an incredible match.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Because Guido's been doing some really, really good submission stuff, as well as keeping up with Crazy doing some pretty impressive moves.
Sure.
So I think him and Guido would be a heck of a fight.
Hey, your company just came back from Japan. Raven, Dreamer, Balls. You guys were all over there for the big FMW show. What do you guys think? What's the locker room saying about the trip to Japan?
They said it was really good. They said that the show was incredible as far as production. They said it was, they had the big, Titantron-like entranceway, and they said it was like a huge thing. I guess it was like a pay-per-view over there.
Yeah.
And they said it was incredible. The biggest complaint was they apparently had break-proof tables.
Oh yeah.
And a few guys, I know Balls said they had a few huge spots done with tables, and where a guy was coming from a really high spots, and the tables just weren't breaking. And you've got somebody the size of Balls, or you got a guy coming down on someone like Balls on a table, and it's not breaking, then that's a pretty sturdy table.
Something's got to give, and if it's not the table.
Yeah, and Balls was saying a lot of guys were getting hurt trying to break these stupid things, and they just wouldn't go.
Shawn Michaels was there. Any more talk about Shawn Michaels joining the fold in Philadelphia?
Well, I certainly don't think he'd be joining the fold. I would be happy with a stopover for an evening. Having a guy of that caliber on our show would be, a tremendous boost to us. I don't know firsthand anything that's been done. I believe he's been talked to, and I believe he has interest. It's just basically I don't think anyone's talked to Vince yet.
Right.
Which I think is probably a mistake, because I would think, since he's basically got the call, since he's, the one paying Shawn, that, he might be the guy you want to contact first.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly don't want to offend him by calling him last.
Right.
But hopefully someone will get to him, either, if Shawn does have interest, maybe he could contact Vince, because I would imagine he'd have more pull than Paul would.
Sorry, go ahead.
If we could, get him for a one night or a two night, or even just, even just a promo, for crying out loud, he's, about as big a name as you get in this business. If we could add him to, a clip or a promo or something we could use to push our show, it would certainly help us.
You're about as close to Paul Heyman as anyone else in the business. Can you explain to me the relationship between Paul Heyman and Vince McMahon? Because Paul couldn't even explain it to me sufficiently.
I don't know what it is. I think there was a bit of a bond made there when Bischoff, first took over and made things happen and got ahead in the races. Vince needed something, and Paul, offered to help. And, the ECW guys on the Raw show and stuff. And I don't know whether it actually did help or not. But, I think they formed a bond there, because Vince needed help, Paul was willing to help him. Mm-hmm. And certainly our guys being on Raw certainly helped us in return. So I think from that point on, they made a little bit of a connection and decided that, I think Paul realized that we've got enough of a pain in the butt trying to deal with WCW and them stealing guys or dealing with, competing on that level. And I think Vince probably figured that he had his hands full dealing with Bischoff, especially at the time.
Right.
So I think they sort of decided that, even if nothing more than the lesser of two evils, I think I would rather deal with this guy than the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, we've had a few other developmental guys in and worked with us and stuff. So I think we've helped them out a few times. So Vince is willing to, help occasionally, or at least not hurt us.
We're doing this interview on Tuesday, December the 7th, the next ECW pay-per-view. Guilty as Charged, scheduled for January 9th, just over a month away. Have you guys announced a location yet?
I don't believe it's been announced. Actually, I just checked the website like about 10 minutes ago, and it hasn't been announced. I talked to Paul on Friday or Saturday, I think Friday, and they've got the building booked, or at least the town booked as far as I know. because we're doing a TV taping on the 7th of January in, I'll tell you where the TV taping is, not the pay-per-view. That way you can sort of at least get a ballpark idea without me spilling the beans. The TV taping is in Pensacola, Florida, which is the northern, western tip floating across the bottom of Alabama there. So we're doing a TNN taping there on the Friday. We get the Saturday off, which could be a travel day, and then the Sunday for the pay-per-view. So the rumors of it being in Vegas, unless it's one heck of a long car ride, we're not going to be in Vegas.
But it may be somewhere in Alabama?
Somewhere in that vicinity, perhaps.
Don't feel like breaking some news here, Lance?
Well, you know, if for some reason that it wasn't a complete finalized deal, I wouldn't want to say it and then have it not happen. So hopefully the ECW website will announce it relatively soon, you know, at least before the show happens.
One thing we didn't talk about last week that I wanted to get to, Vito LaGrasso, Skull, leaving ECW a few weeks ago. Were you guys surprised to see him leave and go to Atlanta?
I don't think anyone was surprised to see him leave. I think, you know, a few people thought he might be leaving earlier than that. He certainly had a way of getting heat with people. Not major heat, but just, you know, the get under your skin and, you know, annoy people at times. I know he even did me, which isn't, you know, too often. Just one of those things. I did a red-eye flight one night. I got into the building, hadn't slept in like a day and a half, fell asleep on a weight bench in the gym where we were working out, and it's like he came in, woke me up and said, "Hey kid, how you doing?" And it's just little things like that that sort of, you know, sort of halfway offend you and drive you crazy that he always seemed to manage to do. And then I had heard that he was friends with Vince Russo to some degree. So certainly that would be a avenue he would look into, and I guess he did. I don't know for sure whether Paul let him go or whether he had an offer or whether they both just said, you know, hey, if you can find work, get it. And so I don't know who initiated it, but he ended up going to WCW, and hopefully he'll do well. The
big mainstream wrestling story of the last couple weeks has been the number of advertisers pulling out of the World Wrestling Federation's SmackDown program, as high profile as Coca-Cola, AT&T, Wendy's, Ford, etc., etc., etc. Is this a concern for you guys? I mean, the Parents Television Council right now has its sights set on the World Wrestling Federation, but should they also have their sights set on ECW, and are you guys concerned about it?
I don't know whether Paul is or not. I don't think we have a whole bunch to be concerned about as of yet. I think, you know, basically because, you know, WWF has so much more exposure, they're going to get, you know, 10 times the flack we are, regardless of whether their content is worse. And I think their content is a little worse and a little harsh.
Considering the audience, yeah.
Well, even regardless of the audience, it's, you know, I think a lot of their angles and, you know, are a little bit more tasteless than ours. Not that we don't do our share of those too, but and you know, they've actually had, you know, a lot more nudity, and, you know, like we have girls, we have cat fights, you know, and their skirts get hiked up and so forth, but we, you know, we haven't actually tore somebody's top off and had them topless on TV, which they have.
Right.
And also the, you know, rolling around in mud and gravy, and, you know, so I think, you know, and then the hose and everything else, it's, you know, they're a little bit harsher product than we are, I think, now, at least as far as the sexuality, which I think is the majority of the complaints. You know, I think the violence is like they expect people to get hit. It's a wrestling show. So I think on that end we're probably a little safer. And I think also, too, I think the big problem with SmackDown is, or at least not the problem with the show, but with the critics, is it's actually like network television, where like USA is still technically cable. You have to subscribe to it, where you can just, you know, plunk down a TV, hook up a set of rabbit ears if you're still, you know, in the Stone Ages, and you can get the show.
Right.
Where, you know, USA is still technically a cable show, you know, Nitro's a cable show, and even TNN, unless you subscribe to a cable service, you don't get the show.
Right. Any of the boys in the locker room said anything about the advertisers pulling out?
No, not really. I think everybody's more concerned with, you know, how our show's doing, what's affecting us, and not so much, you know, I think.
It's just that it's such a mainstream wrestling topic right now. I just wonder if it, you know, if it's of any concern to you guys.
I think everybody's a little bit concerned, but, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, Vince is going to have to deal with, and I think he's already started to. You know, you keep hearing that he's going to tone his show down a bit, and that he's replaced most, if not all, of the sponsors.
It's interesting because The Godfather is a pimp on Monday, but not on Thursday now. It's about the only difference I've seen so far.
Well, I guess you can't pimp 24/7 now, can you? The hose need to break down again.
I suppose so. Hey, Mick Foley looks like he's winding down his career. Last week on TSN, he said the R word. Your thoughts on Mick Foley's career?
I'm honestly surprised he lasted this long with what he's done, and I'm actually about 3/4 of the way done his book, and, you know, he did a lot of stuff I didn't even know about. So it's amazing that he's managed to keep going. I think now, fortunately for him, though, I think with the book doing so well and having, the last few years extremely well in WWF, that, fortunately for him, I think he'll be able to retire, sit home, if he wants to, and, live a fairly comfortable life, which he certainly deserves. He gave a ton to this business, worked his butt off, if that's in fact possible with him.
That's a lot of butt to work.
Yeah, it's like Dreamer. I don't think it can be done. But he paid a ton of dues. He worked extremely hard. He's had success, and I hope he sits home and plays with his kids and has a wonderful life when he does in fact hang up permanently. I don't think he's going to do that yet. But as far as putting out the big matches, I think that's just about behind him now.
Before we get out, one thing I want to talk about. I heard a rumor that Arnold Schwarzenegger approached ECW a couple weeks ago to work an angle on the TNN show. Is that true?
I believe his people did. I believe they wanted to do the exact same thing they did on SmackDown. And from my understanding is, Paul didn't want to do just the exact same thing 2 weeks later, and suggested perhaps trying to do something else. And apparently, I understand, pitched a couple of really interesting and good ideas to him. And it wasn't Paul saying they were good. It was actually, I think, Joey said that there was some good ideas that they had tried to do instead. And then the Arnold people just never got back to him. So I think maybe they thought, they were maybe perhaps apprehensive about doing a wrestling show the first time. It did well, and they just figured, well, we'll just do the exact same thing. And when Paul started, perhaps trying to change something, maybe they just said, oh, we don't need it.
Quickly before we get out, a quick tease. What are we going to see on TNN this week?
I believe Dusty Rhodes. I believe also Justin Credible's first single match. Oh my God! It's 6 months into the show, and he finally got one.
Who does he finally work?
If they air it, Sandman.
Oh, perfect. Does he cane him? Oh, you're not going to give that away.
I'm not giving that away. We need the ratings.
Thanks a lot, Lance. We'll talk to you next week, man.
All right, take it easy. Thank you.